Today I will be talking about strategy number 2, oral histories in the curriculum from the ILAS textbook. Today we're going to be talking about inquiry for students. These are 4 questions that I have that we're going to be answering today during this presentation. Why is inquiry-based learning so important? What does inquiry-based help students understand? Why should teachers use inquiry-based learning? And should we use different oral histories for different students? This strategy provides rich data about life ways of past experiences of diverse populations. It promotes relationships across communities and across generations, and it hits 3 key themes of gathering, summarizing, and communicating. Our students can communicate with other curriculums and other voices of the past, present, and future. So what are oral histories? Oral histories are something that we can use in the classroom to help promote and engage students with history content. Oral histories are used in the classroom for studying information using sound recordings of interviews of people having personal knowledge and personal experience with past and previous events. These oral histories provide rich resources for our students, and they make us ask these 3 questions. They make me ask these 3 questions more specifically of what do oral experiences help me experience as a learner? Oral histories can help shape your viewpoints and how you help your students experience. So what are these oral histories helping your students experience? How can you encourage that self-inquiry that we talked about earlier in the classroom when learning or using oral histories? These questions will be answered throughout this PowerPoint, but I want you to really think about what do these oral histories help you experience? What are they going to help you experience and help your students experience? And how can you really get that inquiry-based learning in the classroom? Well, when trying to get to use these inquiry-based learning, we want to talk about why we're going to use them. They provide rich data for students. They're relevant. Students can see, hear, and experience personal history. And students that often struggle with written words can actually use oral histories to differentiate between the content and how they're receiving that content. It's just another great reason that we should incorporate oral histories. Students will enjoy oral history more if they're actively creating and engaging in it. They're going to be introduced to the concept over several weeks so they can understand the importance and historical topics that they want to be a part of and that they can be a part of. These oral histories teach us so many different things. They paint more concrete representations of the past. They are people's authentic and real, meaningful connections to previous and past experiences. These students are able to hear and study the voice and understand what they're offering. The various viewpoints that oral histories provide. We can look at interviews, and then we can look at a textbook, and we can look at biographies, autobiographies, and we can use those resources to compare and contrast between oral histories and other alternate ways of receiving history. It also allows us to look at what has changed, what has stayed the same, what things did people do back then that we might not do now. We can also use these oral histories across curriculums. We can use them in technology, arts, the science, obviously history, and obviously English language arts. But how can you, as a teacher, connect oral histories across curriculums? I want you to think about this question. We're going to talk about how we can integrate technology, but I want you to think about integrating things such as science, or even math maybe, with oral histories. Here I have included a free site, which is Anchor, for students to create podcasts. This is just one way to integrate technology into the classroom. Students could also create a multimedia project or evaluate the interviews that they choose to listen to. Obviously, when we listen to oral histories, we are listening to the radio. Our technology has advanced so much. If you can remember back to the first picture that I had on this slideshow to the picture that I have here now, we can see how much technology has shifted and how much we actually listen to oral histories. Anytime we listen to someone, speak in a podcast, we're listening to that oral history. We're creating our own oral history through blogs and YouTube channels, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. These oral histories help meet different standards, including the National Content Social Studies standards of culture, time, continuity, and change, and individual development and identity. I have posed 3 questions here. These 3 questions are: what do oral histories tell us about cultures? What about the way people lived? What were things like in the past? How have time, continuity, and change changed in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And what has helped shape and mold these people into what they are portrayed through their voice? I want you to think about these questions as we dive deeper into the National Content Science Standards and talking about things such as people, places, and environments, which is truly an experience for all. People, places, and environments validate experiences for students. If students can be engaged with the content, it can make stories and histories come alive. These are going to be relevant to and for students, especially if it's things that they want to learn about. And it can encourage abstract thinking and curiosity within the classroom, which is just another great example of using inquiry-based learning within the classroom. Students enjoy brainstorming. You should allow students and classes to brainstorm people and topics they find interesting. Generally, they are more interested in the topic or subject. If they are more interested in the topic or subject, the more engaged with the content they will be. We also talk about individuals, groups, and institutions, vital resources for students. Students make decisions based on individuals, groups, and institutions. Students' ideas are shaped by individuals, groups, and institutions. But how will you as a teacher use oral histories in your classroom to promote individualization, group work, and promote different institutions? What do institutions help us learn? Here I have, as we move on, we're going to be talking about institutions and what they help us remember. Oral history stories can be really rich and relevant. Here I have a website that provides students with the opportunity to hear the voices of individuals whose story about slavery is slowly being forgotten. It's really important to remember what oral histories can help us remember. They can help us remember what life was like and make sure that we don't repeat history. One of the many benefits is that oral histories provide the ability to preserve voices. Voices never change in their natural element. They will always remain the same, which is so amazing and so crucial for students, especially when they're learning about stuff like slavery and wars. So how can you get your students interested in these oral histories? What are you going to do to make sure that your students are going to interact with these oral histories in the right way? Well, you can ask students to be a part of the interview creation process. As I talked about earlier, you can encourage students to share what they've learned about their oral history topics with others. A great example would be holding a school or community live history event where students get to share what they have learned about a particular historical figure. Ask students to do historical research on their own family or community. Make it local. Make it known. Allow students to have choice within the classroom. You can also have students do an in-class activity where they conduct interviews. It will bring real-life experiences, excitement, and students can learn about the past through voice, and they can also hit auditory processing. We know that listening fosters engagement. Listening, according to Language Arts Essentials, takes up more than reading, writing, and talking combined for students. So, this in-class activity would be great to help students with auditory processing and using that language arts. Students can also hit ELA standards for comprehension and collaboration of speaking and listening. I have pulled 2 standards here for you to look at, or 2 different activities that you could hold in your own classroom. I want you to be thinking about what activities am I going to have my students do that foster engagement and foster listening and foster good speaking skills and collaboration skills. Here's just one activity to incorporate English language arts. It allows student choice. I have 3 different things that students can do, all based on the same thing. Students can pick a historical character from the past that they're interested in learning more about, and then they're going to be responsible for researching and creating their findings through the following 3 ways. You can read this and implement it in your own classroom one day, because English language arts is so important, because it does foster engagement, and it helps students really connect to what they need to learn about and why they need to learn it. Students can also incorporate the Montana Indian Education for All. Students can read this book called The Navajo Code Talkers. This book talks about gaining a better understanding of the interrelation between historical events, colonialist practices, cultural oppression, cultural survival, and individual and collective identities. In this book, the main character grapples with different choices, historical grievances, and seemingly divided loyalties, and yet discovers that he does not have to discard what is essential and what is valuable in himself, his Navajo identity, once again relating it back to people, places, identities, groups, institutions, and so much more. By reading and discussing this book, the students can look at specific historical situations through the eyes and experiences of someone outside of their own culture. This exercise enables students to discover the importance of diverse perspectives, cultures, and worldviews for understanding current and historical events, and it builds their empathy for the experiences of people who are different from themselves. As we move on to talking about Indian education, we can talk about this lady named Minerva Allen, who is an educator, linguist, poet. Minerva states in one of her poems that we keep our history and culture alive by telling of our ancestors and legends to young people. It's important to share our experiences and share our thoughtfulness because students will be able to make experiences and have empathy for their elders if they are heard through voice. So what did Minerva Allen do? She was an English teacher. Minerva's story is told through a variety of different tapes, recordings, poems, and interviews, and direct quotes from these interviews. How can we ask students to make connections with these artifacts? What are we having them do when we look at what Minerva did for people? We're looking at Minerva's language, how it shaped, how she taught students, which is what we're ultimately going to be doing as teachers, which is so amazing and so critical for our students to get the best inquiry-based learning as possible. As we move on to talking about an oral history lesson that we could do with Minerva Allen, students can write a letter to Minerva comparing and contrasting the Assiniboine culture and traditions of their own. Students can write a haiku poem that is sacred to them personally or to their culture. Students can present their findings to the entire class as a part of a lesson in public speaking. Students will be required to present this material to students in a new way, develop curiosity with their own classmates, and really dive deeper into what oral histories do and can provide for students. Listening to Minerva, students will have a first voice account of events and issues of a tribe. Students can practice their listening skills and be asked to share what they have learned in a student written assignment entailing a letter back to Minerva with their questions, comments, and reactions. As we wrap up and talk about what oral histories provide, we know that it's a great way to get inquiry-based learning within the classroom. It can help our students shape and listen and learn about what people experienced, what their life was like as they were little kids, and how it grew and how it shaped in difficult times, and how the emotions are really portrayed through one's individual voice, through oral histories in the curriculum. As we wrap up, we can look at my resources for images and my resources for text. Thank you for listening to this presentation about oral histories in the curriculum.